This philosophical debate over whether a true path even exists gets a violent reality check, as the ground is obliterated in a display of pure, unadulterated power, and Wu Ming stands amidst the ruin, forced to reckon with the wreckage of his own ambition, until a chained, spectral entity manifests to mock him for letting his hard-won path crumble so easily. While the entity challenges whether Wu Ming's will can actually hold up when everything he's built is reduced to a single, fleeting moment of intent. Wu Ming is told that the fate of the entire world is now resting on his shoulders. Then a sudden, lethal strike decapitates him before he can even respond, and the blade tears through the lingering energy field without a hint of resistance, while a mysterious glowing orb is plucked from the middle of the carnage, so the figure holding it pauses, realizing that the real fight is only just beginning. This entity argues that true creation demands total destruction, and insists that the old path must be discarded before a new one can take its place. Which leads us straight to the bustling chaos of Times Square, where a massive surge of spiritual energy is leaking from a hidden coffin buried beneath the city, leaving the onlookers to realize that something truly unnatural has just arrived in the middle of the crowd. Wu Ming analyzes the feng shui setup, identifying it as a trap designed to harvest massive amounts of yin energy, and he warns the group that the coffin is housing a century-old Jiangxi. But the locals dismiss his professional Taoist credentials, assuming he's just another unreliable foreigner, and they double down on their skepticism, accusing him of trying to scam them out of their money with superstitious nonsense. So Wu Ming finally snaps, clapping his hands to cut through the noise and demand their attention. Wu Ming cuts the small talk and points out the source of the haunting. So Donald, an American businessman, dangles a $1 million bounty to get the job done, and the crowd immediately swarms the coffin with a wild mix of yoga and fire-breathing techniques, while a chaotic storm of magic mirrors and holy purification spells slams into the target. But the coffin doesn't even budge, leaving the attackers completely stunned by their own failure. This group fails to crack the array and lashes out at Wu Ming, blaming his supposed incompetence for their collective stalemate. Wu Ming corrects their assumption about his nationality, but a newcomer interrupts the bickering by calling the entire mob useless. This guy identifies himself as Jack from the Starry Wisdom cult, openly mocking their traditional beliefs in favor of his own deity. Jack forces the crowd to scatter by labeling them heretics, making it clear that he isn't asking for permission to take over. He marches straight toward the coffin, claiming he was specifically invited to handle the mess that everyone else failed to fix. Jack makes contact with the coffin, and the massive surge of spiritual energy instantly dissipates, leaving the crowd in disbelief as they struggle to process how he neutralized that power so effortlessly. And since he clearly possesses the spiritual sight they lack, the onlookers start to panic about what he actually triggered. So one of the skeptics identifies Jack as a pathbreaker and warns everyone that he just made the situation significantly more dangerous. But Jack catches the insult and immediately pivots to confront the guy, calling him out for his disrespect. Jack doubles down on his arrogance, demanding to know if the skeptic still thinks he's a fraud after he supposedly neutralized the coffin's power. But that confidence backfires instantly when a massive surge of green energy erupts from the seal, and as the room fills with suffocating malevolent energy, Wu Ming cuts through the panic to explain that this isn't just some random mist, revealing that the coffin is actually a refining array connecting the ghost and human realms, which Jack just triggered by using brute force. So now the trap is fully active, and something is finally stepping out to claim its due. This malevolent energy leaking from the array is acting as a beacon, summoning a massive horde of vengeful spirits to the site, and because these entities are now visible to everyone, they have crossed the threshold into the physical world where they can actually cause damage. A swarm of hyper-aggressive ghosts, ranging from overworked salarymen to rejected artists, emerges from the void with nothing but pure resentment on their minds. They do not waste any time before lunging at the living, closing the distance with terrifying speed. Donald's security detail is instantly shredded, leaving the businessman screaming for his life as the spirits finally reach him. Donald is getting swarmed by the spirits, and his guards are only staying to fight because their paycheck is still on the line. This situation escalates as the ghosts swarm the group, forcing everyone to realize these things aren't just illusions anymore. This senior warns Wu Ming to stick close since he assumes the kid is powerless, and Wu Ming just offers a dry thanks. Wu Ming corrects the guy's assumption about his nationality, and then he immediately proves his worth by landing a clean hit on an incoming spirit. He clearly doesn't need any protection, because he has been holding back his own combat skills this entire time. Wu Ming is tossing spirits around like ragdolls using pure physical force, which leaves the onlookers questioning if he is even using magic at all. But the priest loses his concentration after getting distracted by the chaos, and his holy light flickers out just when he needs it most. So another fighter steps up to clear the path with tentacle-like strikes, knocking back the encroaching swarm with brutal efficiency. Yet the ghosts keep rising from the ground in endless waves, pushing the remaining defenders to the brink of total exhaustion, and as his allies fall one by one to the overwhelming numbers, he realizes he is the only one left who can hold the line. Wu Ming keeps dismantling the spirits with pure physical strikes, leaving the onlookers completely baffled by his hidden combat prowess. One of the survivors finally breaks his silence to demand what kind of background the kid actually comes from, But Wu Ming ignores the question to focus on the source of the infestation, warning the guy to stay put until the job is done, because he still has a labor fee and talisman bill to collect. So he launches himself directly onto the containment seal. And as he lands on the array, the surrounding horde of spirits turns its collective gaze toward him, ready to defend their master. Wu Ming stands his ground on the containment seal while the horde of spirits closes in. Then he rings a ritual bell to trigger a massive cleansing wave, which instantly wipes out the entire swarm and clears the immediate area, leaving the surviving businessmen in total shock as the threat vanishes into thin air. But Wu Ming warns them this is only the beginning, and he is already calculating the hefty price for his services. Wu Ming kicks the coffin lid wide open to confront the legendary zombie king, but a dark claw immediately reaches out from the shadows. A massive wave of demonic energy erupts from the casket, and he realizes this isn't just a standard undead threat based on the sheer intensity of the aura. A mysterious blonde man steps into the fray, dismissing the entity as a weak century-old relic that lacks any real power. This onlookers identify the creature as a vampire rather than a zombie, and they realize they are dealing with something completely outside their expertise. This stranger confirms their suspicion with a cold stare, revealing that the situation shifted from a simple exorcism to a much deadlier encounter. This blonde stranger locks eyes with the creature, fully aware that this isn't just some low-level undead trash. Then a shadow entity lunges with lethal speed, forcing him to realize he is dealing with a predator that does not play by the rules. He throws up a defensive barrier to tank the blow, but the sheer force of the impact shows he is in for a real fight. This creature keeps the pressure on with a relentless flurry of strikes, pushing the stranger back as he struggles to maintain his footing. His signature touch of the ancient god technique gets completely melted away, and he finally understands that this thing is way more dangerous than he anticipated. This blonde stranger identifies the creature as a pure-blooded vampire with abyssal power, and the businessman realizes the only winning move is to get the hell out, warning his associates that a freshly awakened vampire is basically a starving predator, so he tries to abandon them to their fate with a sarcastic good luck. But the vampire closes the distance in a heartbeat, leaving them nowhere left to run. This vampire sinks his teeth into the blonde stranger's neck, and the boss screams for help as he gets pinned to the ground. Then the creature rips through his flesh in a spray of blood, so the bodyguards open fire, desperate to save their boss without accidentally killing him in the crossfire. But this predator is already locked onto his next target, and he is not letting go. This vampire stands over his latest victim, completely unfazed by the chaos unfolding around him. And since bullets are bouncing off the creature like pebbles, the bodyguards finally realize the legends are true. Then a lethal strike tears through the air, and just as the vampire lunges for the remaining guards, a newcomer jumps in to stop him, shouting that they still have unfinished business, so he slashes the vampire mid-lunge, demanding his payment before the fight goes any further. This blade bites deep into the vampire's guard, drawing blood as the newcomer forces the issue, and the sheer momentum of the strike sends the creature tumbling across the floor. But the vampire realizes he has actually been tagged, and his eyes burn with a lethal, focused rage. So he retaliates with a kick that cracks the very air, forcing the newcomer to brace for the impact, and the newcomer refuses to give an inch, swinging his weapon again to keep the monster on the defensive. This realization hits that this thing is manipulating blood like a weapon, and the vampire launches a lethal stream of crimson directly at his throat. So he finally accepts that vampires are real and barely dodges the incoming strike, deciding that since the creature crawled out of a coffin, he will just treat it like a zombie. Then he lunges forward with his blade to finish the job before the monster recovers. This blade connects with the vampire's guard, forcing the creature to parry the strike mid-air. But then the vampire notices tears streaming down his opponent's face, and the realization that he is crying hits the fighter, leaving him wondering what kind of trick this is, because the vampire is actually manipulating his blood to force a reaction, and the pain is enough to make him scream. So he calls out for his boss, hoping for some backup before this blood magic finishes him off. This boss is down and unresponsive, so his men are desperately trying to wake him up before he dies. His breathing is shallow and ragged, proving he is barely hanging on to consciousness. A new fighter suddenly appears behind the red-haired man, and the surprise is immediate. This red-haired fighter turns to see who interrupted him, clearly confused by the newcomer's sudden presence. This newcomer slams his blade into the earth to demand attention, and the ground cracks under the force of his arrival. These two suits are already tearing each other apart over who botched the job, with the blonde guy calling his partner a coward for just watching the boss get hit, and the other guy firing back that it was his fault the boss took the brunt of the attack, until the kid finally cuts through the noise to announce the ghosts are exorcised and demand his payout. But the suits refuse to pay because they don't know if their boss is even alive, forcing the kid to clarify that the boss is in a weird limbo state while casually correcting their assumption about where he is from. This kid diagnoses the boss's neck wound as a dark magic curse, and he makes it clear that waking him up requires breaking that spell first. This suits immediately pivot to praising Chinese Taoist methods over their own, but the kid shuts down the celebration by noting this wasn't in the original contract and will cost them extra. They don't even blink at the price, promising that their boss is legendary for his generosity and will pay whatever it takes to get him back on his feet. This kid is already losing patience with their desperate back and forth, realizing this job is dragging on way longer than he signed up for. Flashback to 3 days ago in China, where a man is getting a mysterious talisman slapped onto his forehead to seal his fate. This master tells the parents to count to 3 while he works on the possessed boy, and just like that, the kid snaps back to reality, leaving everyone in the room completely blindsided by the sudden recovery. This master starts bragging about his disciple's skill, claiming the kid only has a tenth of his power but still made the exorcism look like a joke. But the celebration dies instantly when the boy starts screaming about his weird obsession with smelling Xiao Li's underwear, and the parents realize their son isn't actually cured, leaving the master with absolutely nothing to say for himself. This master doubles down, insisting to his disciple that the possession was genuine and the job was handled perfectly, pointing to the talisman as proof that the red seal successfully extracted all the dark magic. But when that fails to convince anyone, he pivots to claiming the kid had underlying psychological issues, brandishing a business card that lists him as a certified clinical psychologist, and he even puts on glasses to sell the act. But the parents aren't having it and immediately kick him out of the house, leaving him back on the street, bitter and complaining that these people just don't appreciate a true professional when they see one. This master is still scouting the wall of flyers, lamenting the lack of a payday but deciding that absorbing that dark magic counts as a win. He starts lecturing his disciple on how to turn this cultural heritage into a gold mine, because apparently everything is a business opportunity. This master insists the kid is his chosen successor for this great art, but the disciple just wants to finish the job so they can finally grab a meal. Preaching about the life of a true cultivator, the master claims they should be above earthly hunger and feed on celestial chi instead. A notification for a new job pops up on his phone, and his high-minded lecture vanishes the second he realizes there is actual money on the line. This client offers $50,000 upfront and $1 million reward, and the master loses his mind at the payout. Seeing the deposit hit his account, the master plans a feast, leaving his disciple wondering how they got rich so fast. He books a plane ticket to the States for the kid, but the disciple is confused when he realizes he is going alone. This master frames the solo trip as a character-building exercise, but he is really just pocketing the extra travel money for himself. He is already fantasizing about donating his cut to his favorite streamers, while reminding the kid to bring back that $1 million prize. This master examines the body and realizes something is definitely off, because a strange demonic energy is blocking his talismans and preventing him from extracting the Tao, so he concludes that the only way to break the curse is to find the person who cast it, and he initiates a tracking technique to pinpoint the exact source of that dark energy, folding the talisman into a paper crane to follow the trail straight to the culprit. This paper crane locks onto the target's energy, so the master orders the team to get Mr. Donald to the hospital, while the blonde vampire wanders through the city street, completely disoriented and struggling to piece together his recent memories, because he cannot recall who he fought or why he was left unconscious on the ground, leaving him in a total mental fog. But his aimless walking comes to a sudden halt when he accidentally knocks a limited edition ice cream out of a kid's hand, and the boy lets out a desperate scream over his ruined treat, leaving the confused vampire standing there with no idea what just happened. This kid is throwing a fit over his ruined ice cream, but the vampire tries to play it cool and de-escalate the situation, reaching into his coat to offer a peace offering. He apologizes for the distraction and asks for a little forgiveness, then drops a handful of solid gold coins into the kid's hands, clearly having no concept of modern currency, and the surrounding crowd immediately loses their minds over the pure gold, while the vampire casually asks to borrow the kid's phone for a second, only to finally realize he has been acting completely out of touch with this world, and the weight of his own strangeness finally hits him. This vampire finally takes a good look at his surroundings, realizing he is somewhere completely foreign to him. He stares at the glowing city skyline, genuinely impressed by how beautiful this strange new world has become. It hits him that he has been out of the loop for way too long, feeling like he has stepped into an entirely different dimension. He tracks the blur of modern cars moving through the night, baffled by how bright and fast everything is now. Everything is brand new to him, and he cannot help but marvel at how far this era has come. This couple is just trying to grab a quick selfie and counting down to the shot, but the vampire decides to jump right into the frame, completely oblivious to the social boundary, which sends the guy into a rage about his ruined photo and the weirdo crashing their moment. So he tells the guy to go bother someone else and leave normal people alone. Then he drags his girlfriend away. But that lingering feeling that something is wrong makes him look back one last time. A passing couple mistakes his antique attire for a costume, and the woman is clearly obsessed with his unique style. So he starts wondering if this entire city is just playing dress-up, questioning if modern power users actually walk around in these outfits. Then a girl dressed as a witch approaches him, convinced his look is just a high-effort vampire costume, and she insists he join their group for the night, dragging him into their social circle before he can even explain. Now he is stuck posing for photos with a bunch of strangers who think he is just another dedicated fan. This witch keeps pestering him about his cosplay club, but he tries to clarify he is actually talking about real special powers. Then a mysterious paper talisman lands on his shoulder, and the realization that he is being tracked hits him hard as a guy in traditional robes steps out of the crowd, cutting right to the chase by saying he finally found him. And while the girl assumes the newcomer is just another cosplayer, he is actually here to confront the vampire for cursing his client, which makes the vampire realize this is the same guy from when he first woke up, and the danger becomes real. This guy realizes his target isn't coming back willingly, so he decides to wake him up by force to secure his payment. Crowds are everywhere, forcing him to keep his physical intervention subtle to avoid drawing any unwanted attention. Jack immediately starts groveling and apologizing for his blunder, but his desperate act just earns him a cold, judging stare. A harsh reprimand comes through from his cult, labeling his mission a total failure and calling him useless trash. Jack tries to save face by blaming a pure-blood vampire who ambushed him from a coffin, forcing his retreat. This woman mocks Jack for his failure, questioning if the ancient god's power is actually weak or if he is just too pathetic to handle a mere vampire. But he desperately insists the power is boundless and begs for more, even as she readies her whip to shut him up. And before he can finish his plea, the lash snaps around his throat to silence his excuses for good. Then she mocks his devotion to his deity and yanks him forward, proving that he is nothing more than a slave to her whims. Finally, she unleashes a corrupting energy to pollute his very essence, leaving him screaming as the dark power tears him apart from the inside. This ground shatters under the sheer force of her power, and she towers over the pathetic Jack, declaring that trash like him is unworthy of the energy she wields. Turning her focus toward hunting the vampire while whispering a prayer to her ancient god to lead her straight to him, but Jack is too far gone to care about the mission, groveling at her feet and begging for a chance to worship her, so she shuts him down with a brutal kick and orders him to get lost before she loses her patience entirely. This woman walks out on Jack with a promise to train him later, and he is so broken he actually thanks her for the beating. While across town, a stranger corners the protagonist to demand his name, only to get a cold Wu Ming in response, which the guy quickly realizes is just a placeholder for having no name at all. And after Fascio introduces himself as a high-ranking blood noble with a taste for fresh victims, he is met with nothing but a flat O. So every attempt to pry into his personal life or food preferences hits a brick wall as the protagonist refuses to give him anything. Fascio keeps digging into his past and personal connections, but Wu Ming shuts down every single question with a cold, blank wall. This noble tries a different angle by asking for directions to the hospital, hoping to get a lead on where they are. Wu Ming flips the script by questioning if he's a foreigner, which forces the guy to admit he's been out of the loop. For so long, he doesn't even know the current year. Realizing they are completely lost, the noble suggests grabbing a taxi to get Mu, but Wu Ming reveals he already gave away their only gold coins, leaving him to suggest pawning that fancy outfit to cover the fare. Wu Ming points out that Fascio has been speaking Chinese this whole time, which hits the noble like a ton of bricks. And Fascio realizes his memory is basically Swiss cheese since he has no clue how he even picked up the language. So he starts dumping his internal crisis on Wu Ming, admitting he cannot even remember how he ended up trapped in a coffin, explaining that his last clear memory was waking up with a primal, blood-starved instinct that sent him spiraling into this disaster. And while Fascio keeps apologizing for the mess he has made, Wu Ming is clearly done with the pity party and tells him to drop it. A car pulls up to the curb, and the driver offers the duo a ride. So Fascio and Wu Ming hop in, with the noble taking the passenger seat while Wu Ming settles into the back. But the driver clearly recognizes Fascio, even though the noble has absolutely no idea who this guy is, and as they cruise down the highway toward the hospital, the driver gets curious about their late-night emergency, which leads them to admit they are broke, prompting the driver to mention that the gold coin Alan handed over earlier was more than enough to cover them. Fascio tries to hand the gold coin back to Wu Ming, claiming it was only meant for the ice cream, but Wu Ming shuts him down, forcing the noble to keep the payment despite his protests. Relentless nagging finally wears Wu Ming down, so he grudgingly accepts the coin just to stop the noise. This leaves the noble feeling pretty smug about his integrity until he catches a weird vibe in the air. Meanwhile, a mysterious woman watching from above calls him out, noting that he is nothing like the rumors suggested. Wu Ming spots shadowy figures trailing the car, calling them arrogant and elegant, and Fascio realizes they are completely surrounded by these things on both sides of the vehicle, so he screams for the driver to stop the car before they get hit. But the entities strike the vehicle with enough force to send it spinning out of control, and the car erupts in a massive explosion, leaving their fate hanging in the balance. Wu Ming manages to drag Fascio clear of the wreckage just as the car goes up in flames, and Fascio immediately checks to see if his savior made it out in one piece. But Wu Ming is more concerned about his outfit catching fire than the near-death experience, lamenting the cost of his ruined gear since his master warned him they were pricey. Then a woman with a whip drops in to mock them, clearly amused by the sight of these two survivors. Wu Ming asks the woman to hold off on attacking the vampire until he finishes his own business, but she finds his request adorable and decides to test him out instead. So she lashes out with her whip, forcing him to scramble away from her sudden aggression, and the strike tears through the ground right where he was standing. Then the weapon coils around him and flings him through the air, proving he is completely out of his league. A desperate mother begs Wu Ming to save her son, Alan, who is lying nearby in critical condition, and she offers him anything he wants if he can just keep the boy alive. But the blue-haired woman loses interest in the games and lashes out with her whip again, which forces a kid with a sword to dodge the strike, leaving him bewildered by the unprovoked attack, so Wu Ming confronts the boy, demanding to know why he didn't fight back against her. Wu Ming reminds the woman that his master's training isn't free, but she just laughs and claims them as her own. Then a sudden, precise strike pierces her chest before she can even finish her sentence, and she is instantly shredded by a barrage of razor-sharp red threads that tear through her body. So the blonde man who launched the attack tells her she brought this on herself, leaving Wu Ming confused about his talk of payment, because this guy clearly has no patience for people who put kids like Alan in danger just for their own amusement. This blue-haired woman keeps lashing out, complaining about how annoying this entire resistance has become, but the blonde man has finally hit his breaking point and screams that he is done, and he lunges at her, wondering if his master would label this righteous fury as insanity, while the woman just scoffs at his disobedience, claiming he is going to be a difficult pet. Then she calls upon the great ancient god to consume her, embracing a dark new power. This dark energy consumes her entirely, and she begins to mutate into something far more dangerous. Then she sprouts massive tentacles and announces that the second round of training has officially begun, and she signals the start of the slaughter, clearly enjoying the chaos she is about to unleash, which sends a massive wave of dark energy surging toward the blonde man and Wu Ming, so the ground shatters under the weight of her strike, forcing them to scramble for their lives. This mutated woman singles out the blonde man as the first to be punished for his defiance, so he barely manages to intercept her strike before it connects. But the sheer force of the impact sends him hurtling across the battlefield, and he realizes her speed has spiked to a terrifying new level as he crashes into the earth. Then he notices his own hands trembling with a loss of control, finally identifying her as a Puritan he thought had long since gone extinct. This mutated woman claims her Church of Starry Wisdom is expanding without any end, calling the blonde man a relic of a dying vampire race. So he rejects her insults and prepares to unleash his invocation of sin. Wu Ming watches the blonde man channel power from the depths of blood and flesh, and the woman taunts him by claiming she already controls the very sins he tries to wield. This blonde man screams that he is becoming the Knight of the Night to descend into this world, but his invocation of sin dissolves into nothing, and he panics as his power fails him completely. This mutated woman mocks his pathetic display, asking if he is finally finished with his little show. Then she demands he submit as her slave, praying to her ancient god to wipe out this pureblood vampire for good. Tentacles lash out to bind the blonde man in place while Wu Ming watches, and she dares him to repeat his defiance if he still has the guts. This mutated woman realizes her ancient god's mental energy has been severed, and she cannot believe a mere human managed to cut it off so easily. She curses the wasted talisman while finally acknowledging that Wu Ming is no ordinary kid, and she vows to make him pay for the interference. This blonde man screams for Wu Ming to restrain her while he still has the chance, but she brushes off the earlier failure as a lucky coincidence. She lunges forward to end the threat, closing the distance between them in a heartbeat. Declaring that coincidences do not strike twice, she claims Wu Ming for her ancient god and begins the process of corrupting his soul entirely. Wu Ming unleashes a torrent of mental energy that dwarfs the power of the ancient god, and the mutated woman realizes she is being crushed by a force far more immovable than her deity, so she reels from the mental and physical assault. Yet she finds the overwhelming sensation strangely fascinating. Then the blonde man steps back into the fray as the woman loses her footing and control, and she finally collapses to her knees, completely broken by the sheer intensity of the power she just encountered. Wu Ming calls out the woman for her sloppy cultivation interference, then orders her to get an ambulance from New York Hospital immediately. This blonde vampire notes the mother is unconscious while the son is fading fast, questioning why Wu Ming let her leave the scene. His master's warnings about causing trouble in foreign lands kept him back, plus he knows staying wouldn't have changed the boy's grim prognosis. Realizing the boy is still a virgin, the vampire decides there is actually a way to pull him back from the brink of death. He sinks his fangs into the child, banking on a desperate blood ritual to reverse the damage before it is too late. Wu Ming confirms the boy's new status, and the blonde guy admits the ritual drained him dry. Though Wu Ming isn't impressed, calling out his failure against the woman and the wasted talisman, this vampire tries to save face by insisting on his own strength despite the obvious fatigue, until his body finally gives out, and he hits the ground hard from the sheer physical toll, leaving Wu Ming to wonder if this reckless sacrifice is exactly what his master meant by having too much compassion. Wu Ming drops a coin into the beggar's bowl, but the man mocks his charity by tossing back a measly 50 cents, so his master steps in to stop the bleeding, deciding a history lesson is worth more than the kid's spare change, and he recounts the tale of Zigong, a disciple who bankrupted himself buying the freedom of slaves, only to reveal that Confucius actually scolded him, because refusing the reward made it impossible for anyone else to do the same without expecting a payout. This master questions whether a good deed that upsets the world's balance is truly virtuous, and he warns the boy to steer clear of bleeding heart do-gooders and self-righteous fanatics. Yet the kid stands over the fallen vampire, who somehow manages to embody both of those traits the master loathes, though the boy can't bring himself to share that hatred, because he watches as someone is slowly choked out by a web of crimson energy. This principal's face returns to normal, so the group acknowledges the vampire's massive effort to stabilize him. Exhaustion hits the vampire hard, and he demands more blood bags to keep himself going. NYUC Hospital becomes their next stop, since this era makes sourcing blood way too easy. Sipping on a fresh bag, the vampire doesn't seem bothered by the kid's stare. He brushes off the judgment, claiming that craving blood is just basic biology for his kind. This vampire explains why Tongde didn't turn, noting that the transformation depends entirely on the victim's virginity, because anyone who isn't a virgin just gets drained into a mindless zombie, creating a self-sustaining cycle of nourishment for the clan, and he admits this whole gift is actually a curse that the original grantor can snatch back whenever they want, which reminds the kid of the dark magic he's seen before, specifically the kind labeled as demonic in their homeland, where priests use incantations to raise these zombies, creating enemies that are a massive pain to deal with because they share the same power source. This vampire teases Wu Ming about the risk of becoming a mindless zombie, but the kid makes it clear he is only in this for the paycheck. A suit interrupts their banter to announce the principal is finally awake and demanding to see them, and the guy is already losing his mind, chanting about national pride while waving his arms from the hospital bed. So he starts gushing with gratitude for the team's help, but Wu Ming cuts the sentiment short by demanding his payment immediately. Then he starts tallying up the $1 million mission fee plus the extra costs for curse removal and spell supplies. Wu Ming demands the $1.1 million fee in cash or digital transfer, but the principal tries to stall with a bank card. This guy clearly has other plans, pivoting to offer Wu Ming a permanent position by his side, but the kid isn't biting. Dismissing the job offer, Wu Ming claims he has to get back to cook for his master, and he starts walking out. This principal calls out one final warning that the demonic residue will still leave his luck in shambles, so he better watch his back. Wu Ming just gives a non-committal grunt, clearly more focused on his paycheck than the principal's cryptic advice. This nun and priest realize their operation has gone completely sideways, as the priest points out the source of their sudden panic. This coffin is wide open and the spirits have already been cleared out, which means someone else snatched the prize. So the group grumbles until one of them notices a strange presence. A mysterious figure blocks the exit to mock their tardiness, though the guy seems to be sleepwalking while he does it. This mysterious guy doesn't even wait for them to finish talking, and he cuts through the group before they can even draw their weapons, so they realize his spiritual signature is identical to the coffin's, meaning he's the one who cleared out all the spirits. But when they demand his true goal, he just tells them to hand over their souls instead. And as he stands over a literal graveyard of bodies, he reveals that he has finally woken up. This mysterious guy is finally awake and ready to start his own twisted version of a new chapter. And he's clearly enjoying his freedom, wandering the city streets like he owns the place, while he mutters prayers to ancient gods for forgiveness, though he doesn't sound like he actually regrets a thing. Meanwhile, a purple-haired woman is caught in some kind of trance, obsessed with a sensation that's completely warped her reality, leaving her completely oblivious to the two thugs cornering her in the alleyway until they start running their mouths. This purple-haired woman confronts the thug about the stench of smoke clinging to him, and he snaps back that he's only here on the boss's orders while demanding to know Jack's location. But the reality is that everyone who joined Tang Day for the exorcism last night was wiped out. Jack was among those killed, meaning he has already met his end. So the guy pours a final offering over the body to mark the end of the line. Jack is desperate, begging Lord James for mercy while pleading for Lady Chanel, and the moment he recognizes who he is dealing with, his tone shifts. Lord James demands to know if Jack is responsible for the slaughter at the Awards Society, so Jack deflects the blame onto a pureblood vampire that escaped from the coffin. Then he brings up Lady Chanel again, clearly hoping her name will buy him some protection. Lord James demands to know where the girl is and why Jack returned empty-handed. But Jack claims they almost had her until a mysterious Asian guy stepped in to intervene, which immediately catches the attention of Lord James and his associate as they press for details. So Jack reveals that this same boy opened the coffin and was working alongside Lady Chanel. And Lord James finally realizes the vampire was under the boy's control all along. Chanel isn't buying the idea that the boy is just some random kid, and Lord James notes that the association of superpowered individuals is already breathing down their necks. So they decide to hunt down the main perpetrator to clear their own names and win the association's favor. But Chanel is too distracted by the boy's overwhelming strength and a familiar resemblance that is clearly rattling her. Then a hooded associate mocks her for showing fear, only to get a sharp defensive retort in return. Lord James orders Chanel to use her powers to track Miller, dismissing him as weak, but his hooded associate insists that the Supreme Commander's orders to channel the old god's power need to be executed now. Meanwhile, at the New York airport, someone rejects a final plea from the president to stay, so a suit hands over a ticket and a reward for the boy's master, thanking him for shifting his view on China before parting ways. This boy stands alone in the terminal, only to be approached by a stranger who points out that his target has already vanished. This stranger is still hanging around, pestering the kid about why he hasn't left for his journey yet, and he keeps pushing for a connection, claiming the boy feels strangely familiar and likable, so the kid finally shuts him down with the coldest take possible, admitting he just doesn't find the guy annoying, which hits the stranger way harder than it should, as he starts acting like this is some profound emotional breakthrough. But the kid clarifies that he barely understands human emotions, making that single compliment a rare admission of value that leaves the stranger completely caught off guard. This stranger keeps fishing for validation, but the kid only gives him a lukewarm nod, and even as the guy tries to lock in a future friendship, the kid shuts it down by pointing out he is an orphan who has never had friends to begin with, which leads to a grim warning that everyone close to him ends up suffering, leaving only his master as the sole exception. So when the stranger asks about the master's power, the kid mentions a failed trial that cost the man his immortality and casually hands over his WeChat. chat, and the stranger is already hyped to meet such a legend, not realizing the kid is already dialing him up on a video call. Wu Ming warns the stranger that his master isn't exactly a people person, then yanks him aside just before he trips over a banana peel. This stranger realizes he almost ate pavement and thanks the kid, but he is already back to fawning over the phone. He starts rambling about how professional and fast Master Li is, while Wu Ming just sighs at how bizarre human behavior remains. Master Li finally pops up on the video call looking like a total mess, so Wu Ming bluntly asks why he looks like he is suffering and having the time of his life simultaneously. This master tries to play it off as simple joint exercises, even though he is clearly struggling after losing his spiritual roots. Master Li keeps pushing his training to restore his sacred Taoist bones, even while he is stuck on a video call. This stranger is completely starstruck by this display of humility, though he is more interested in finding out who is standing next to Wu Ming. A guy named Fashio introduces himself as a vampire and tries to befriend the kid, but Wu Ming is not having any of it and tells him to back off. Master Li hears the news and actually encourages the connection, telling Wu Ming that he needs to learn how to deal with people. Wu Ming begrudgingly accepts the advice, while Fashio keeps gushing over the master's reputation. Wu Ming updates Master Li on his arrival at the airport, and Fashio is clearly losing his mind over the casual nature of the call. Checking his ticket details, Wu Ming ignores the vampire hovering, while Fashio keeps trying to insert himself into the conversation. With an 11:30 p.m. departure time confirmed, Wu Ming tries to walk away, but Fashio is still obsessing over the logistics of the flight path. Master Li checks in on the mission payment, and Wu Ming confirms the funds have hit his account as expected. Master Li is already gloating about his student's success and heads toward the bank, fully convinced that Wu Ming is the golden child of the cultivation world. This escalator suddenly jerks and malfunctions, sending Wu Ming and Fashio tumbling through the air as the machinery tears itself apart. And once they hit the ground, Fashio immediately checks to see if Wu Ming is hurt. But the kid realizes his flight ticket has vanished into the depths of the broken stairs. So when the maintenance worker claims the unit was just serviced, Fashio snaps at him for the obvious failure that just cost them their boarding pass. Master Li brushes off the escalator disaster, telling Wu Ming that a lost ticket is just a minor inconvenience compared to his safety. This airport staff hands over a replacement boarding pass, and Wu Ming finally has his travel documents back in hand. With boarding calls echoing through the terminal, the group heads straight for the gate to catch their flight on time. Fashio is baffled by how they bypassed the massive security line, so he pesters Wu Ming for the secret behind their speed. This staff clarifies that special cases get priority treatment, which is enough to shut the vampire up for the moment. This hooded man is still reflecting on how he barely survived his last brush with death. And while Fashio keeps pestering Wu Ming about how these modern smartphones handle money and communication, a distracted airport worker slams his heavy cart right into them. So when the guy starts apologizing for his lack of focus, Wu Ming and Fashio just stare him down in total silence, because they both have a bad feeling that something else is about to go wrong. This airport worker loses his balance and takes a hard tumble, but Fashio snags him mid-air before he hits the deck. Fashio doesn't exactly offer a gentle landing, punting the guy away the second he is secure. Turning to Wu Ming, Fashio points out that this string of disasters is way too convenient to be random. Wu Ming realizes he might be under some kind of supernatural heck, and Fashio confirms his suspicion, labeling the phenomenon a destiny-altering curse that is clearly targeting them. Wu Ming realizes that whoever cursed him is a pathbreaker hiding in plain sight, so he scans the crowded terminal to find the person responsible for this string of bad luck. Fashio catches on and offers to team up to hunt the culprit down, but Wu Ming shuts him down, insisting that Fashio needs to get out of there before things get worse. He knows his curse is a magnet for disaster, and he is not about to let his only friend get dragged into the crossfire. Fashio brushes off the curse, claiming that vampires are far too resilient to be bothered by minor bad luck. A massive steel beam suddenly plummets from the ceiling, but Wu Ming insists he can handle this alone because the girl from before is the one actually pulling the strings. This heavy metal crashes down right between them, narrowly missing a direct hit as the environment turns lethal. Demanding to know if Wu Ming can actually survive the next attack, Fashio questions the wisdom of facing this threat alone. Wu Ming finally pieces together the truth behind the girl's pattern, and he realizes exactly what she is planning next. Wu Ming realizes this isn't a series of random accidents, but one single exponentially growing curse. And while he calculates the next disaster, the red-haired mastermind watches from the shadows, mocking their realization as far too late, because this guy is tired of being treated like a nobody and is finally ready to show everyone his true power, claiming he's the chosen vessel for ancient gods, which explains his twisted, fanatical grin. Then the airport speakers blare an emergency alert for Gate C-13, confirming that the catastrophe is already putting innocent lives in the crossfire. Wu Ming realizes the only way to break this curse is by attacking fate itself, even though he has never encountered anything this twisted before. Fashio points out that hunting the caster is their only real shot, but the rapidly shrinking interval between disasters means they are running out of time. This airport intercom announces that Flight BO4 is ready for boarding at Gate C-13, which is exactly where the next disaster is set to unfold. Wu Ming connects the dots between the flight announcement and the curse, so he demands the ticket from Fashio to take control of the situation. Tearing the ticket in half is Fashio's immediate answer, choosing to sabotage their own travel plans rather than walk straight into the trap. Wu Ming stops Fashio, pointing out that the curse isn't just growing exponentially, and he breaks down the pattern, starting from the petty stuff like the banana peel and the paper plane, before moving to the life-threatening elevator malfunction and the transport cart that almost took them out, concluding that the flight ticket was the real trap meant to force them into a mid-air death. So by destroying that ticket, they have managed to derail the curse's entire endgame. Wu Ming realizes that reissuing the ticket was the exact moment the curse latched back onto them. And while Fascio assumes the threat is over now that the ticket is shredded, a bystander suddenly drops to the floor. This guy hits the ground hard, and the surrounding crowd starts scrambling to see what happened. A doctor pushes through to start CPR, but he immediately hits a wall when he tries to help. That mysterious device strapped to the man is actively preventing any medical intervention, and the doctor is already realizing he is out of his depth. This bystander's heart has completely stopped, and the situation just went from a medical emergency to a full-blown nightmare. A countdown timer on a hidden bomb reveals it was rigged to detonate the moment he flatlined, leaving them with barely 10 seconds to clear the area. Wu Ming realizes their plan to derail the curse failed because the map of fate simply adjusted its target in real time. He explains that the curse was originally designed to hijack his flight, but since he never boarded, it had to improvise a new way to kill him. By forcing a heart attack on the terrorist, the curse triggered the bomb early to ensure the explosion still happens right here in the terminal. Wu Ming realizes the curse started long before they even stepped into the terminal, so he urges Fascio to get moving before they are caught in the crossfire. He re-evaluates the entire timeline of events, realizing that focusing only on the plane ticket was a massive oversight in their understanding of the curse's logic. A child's desperate plea for help cuts through the terminal, and the realization hits Wu Ming that the curse has shifted its focus to a new target. This girl on the floor is screaming for her father as the threat closes in, and the true cruel nature of this trap finally becomes clear. This bomb timer drops to 5 seconds, and the father nearby realizes his daughter is the one trapped in the blast zone. This father breaks down in tears, begging his daughter for forgiveness as he realizes he's as helpless to save her. So Fascio orders him to get out of there and lunges toward the girl, scooping her up in a desperate sprint just as the bomb timer ticks down to 2 seconds. But with the clock hitting 0 and the blast imminent, he realizes he cannot shield her from the full force while running, and he makes the split-second decision to hurl her to safety before the explosion tears through the terminal. This bomb detonates with enough force to level the entire terminal, and Fascio takes the full brunt of the blast, his body being torn apart by the sheer intensity of the shockwave. He realizes the energy is enough to reduce him to ash, but Wu Ming ignores the danger and plunges into the inferno to grab his hand. And because the blast is a death sentence for anyone nearby, Fascio screams that this rescue attempt will just get them both killed. This antagonist mocks Fascio, pointing out that despite his elite vampire lineage, he is nothing but a liability to his friends. Fascio screams for him to cut the connection, but Wu Ming refuses to back down, insisting they face this nightmare as a team. Wu Ming realizes there is no other way out, so he tells Fascio this is the end, and he begins weaving a seal using Fascio's own stolen power and their most cherished memories, finally telling Fascio to rest in peace as the ritual begins to consume him. This ritual kicks into high gear, and those ancient chains start locking down the space around them. Wu Ming pulls on Fascio's energy, tearing through the reality of the blast to weave the final seal. This crowd at the terminal watches the firestorm, completely losing their minds as the destruction hits a dead end. An invisible barrier holds the explosion back, forcing the flames to crawl around the perimeter instead of vaporizing everything. Bystanders realize this is some kind of high-level Eastern technique, and they cannot even begin to process the sheer scale of the rebound. This antagonist unleashes a technique called sinful chanting to harden his body, but Wu Ming doesn't flinch, closing the distance to confront him head-on, and the strain of the ritual starts to break the vampire down from the inside, forcing a desperate scream out of him as his defenses finally crumble under the pressure, while the bystanders just stand there filming the entire disaster on their phones, like it is some viral trend. Fascio is left gasping for air after the chaos, struggling to regain his composure while Wu Ming watches him. Checking for any major injuries, Wu Ming asks if he is actually hurt, but Fascio claims he is physically fine, though he admits to being hit by a sudden, overwhelming wave of sadness he cannot explain. This explosion left a minor wrist injury on Fascio, yet he brushes it off as nothing worth worrying about. Frustrated by the heroics, Fascio starts to lash out, so Wu Ming suggests they get out of the public eye and find somewhere private to talk. Fascio is stunned that the curse is actually broken, and Wu Ming confirms his earlier theory was on the right track. It turns out the physical ticket wasn't the real target, but the underlying reason for its destruction is what actually mattered. Wu Ming explains how the curse kept leveling up through failed attempts like a banana peel and a kite, eventually burning his ticket during an elevator accident to successfully shift his fate. Fascio realizes he was the one who tore the second ticket, making him the accidental key to ending the whole cycle. Wu Ming reveals he intentionally took the hit from the explosion to break the curse while saving Fascio, who is just glad his own power didn't trigger and ruin the entire plan. Wu Ming lunges for the red-haired guy, telling him it's fine while he closes the gap, and with a swift kick, he thanks the guy for saving him 4 spells, leaving Fascio confused until Wu Ming points out that this is the actual curse caster, explaining that every previous curse was triggered by someone touching him to mark the target, so he tracked the guy down during the chaos to finally put an end to the cycle. Wu Ming questions if his earlier kick actually hit the target, while the kid nearby accidentally drops his water bottle, But before the bottle hits the ground, Wu Ming intercepts it, explaining that this exact moment is how the curse finally breaks. And when the kid immediately tries to bolt, claiming his hand just slipped, Wu Ming realizes he is trying to escape, so he stops Fashio from chasing him, revealing that Fashio is now tethered to the curse as well, and warns that defying the laws of heaven carries a heavy price, since messing with destiny is a dangerous game. This curse is finally rebounding onto the caster, forcing everyone in the terminal to scramble for safety, but the red-haired guy is actually thrilled, convinced he's finally unlocked the true power of his God-given ability, and he vows that death is inevitable the moment his target slips up, dismissing their survival as nothing more than dumb luck, though he clearly doubts that luck can hold out for much longer. While the onlookers realize that staying anywhere near the target is a death sentence, so they scatter to avoid getting caught in the crossfire. Wu Ming initiates a video call, and Fashio immediately spots a mysterious symbol glowing on the screen. Recognizing the sigil as a sealing ritual linked to his own master, Wu Ming realizes the stakes are far higher than just a simple curse. They debate who else might know these forbidden marks, but the conversation cuts short when Wu Ming answers the incoming call. Fashio brings up the recent terrorist attack on the flight, and Wu Ming confirms the curse is handled, though the pattern on the screen triggers a sudden jarring memory. This symbol is actually connected to his own death inside a coffin, and the memory forces him to confront the anger and regret he thought he had buried for good. Wu Ming is spiraling over those buried memories, but Fashio just wants to know if the flight is still delayed. Recovering that lost past is now his only priority, so he asks Fashio if he recognizes the strange sigil glowing on his phone screen. This symbol is clearly a seal, and Wu Ming demands to know how to break it from the contact on the other end of the line. A woman answers and immediately tries to charge him for the advice, though she offers a small discount since he knows Wu Ming. Calling out the guy for acting like a total scammer, Wu Ming gets a lecture from his master about being way too trusting with strangers. This call with his master cuts off abruptly, and police officers immediately corner them to demand cooperation regarding the recent terrorist attack. Fashio ignores the officers to keep trying his master, but they insist he drop everything and come with them right now. Their constant badgering finally pushes him over the edge, and he snaps at them to back off because he has more important things to handle. His patience completely evaporates, and he threatens to tear the officers to pieces if they do not stop their incessant talking. This officers realize they have pushed the wrong guy too far, and they brace for the incoming attack as the situation turns violent. This officers draw their weapons and order Fashio and Wu Ming to surrender, accusing Fashio of assaulting an officer, which means he is officially under arrest, and the cop threatens to use force if he tries anything suspicious, so Fashio lets them slap the cuffs on him without putting up a fight, and the pair is hauled away to face the consequences of their outburst. Wu Ming and Fashio are still dissecting the mechanics of the forbidden magic used in the attack, when a woman in a white blazer suddenly interrupts their investigation with a casual greeting, and she drops the bomb that it has been a century since they last crossed paths, before lunging into Wu Ming's arms and calling him her brother, leaving him to deal with her emotional outburst after 100 years of silence. This woman calls out the name Haifei, and it is clear she has been waiting a long time to find him. Wu Ming tries to play it cool with a business trip excuse, but she is not buying his casual act for a second. She drops the bombshell that the clan spent a century hunting for him, and her resentment is finally boiling over. This weight of 100 years of silence hits her all at once, and she starts sobbing in the middle of the terminal, so Wu Ming scrambles to quiet her down, desperate to get the full story on why the clan is in such a mess. She shuts down the idea of moving to a private spot, insisting that they talk right here in the middle of the terminal, and she starts chanting about a sanctuary of abandoned grace, turning the atmosphere into a twisted playground of grief, while she warps the reality around them into a red-ringed domain where she intends to take control. But the ordinary people nearby just walk right past them, completely unimpressed and calling the whole scene a waste of time, which is exactly what she wanted since she has already distorted their perception, leaving the two of them free to talk without any witnesses. Wu Ming just wants to keep the peace and asks his sister to stop the waterworks, but she is already digging into his past, questioning if he has been trapped in a coffin for the last century, and she starts aggressively checking him for magical disguises, convinced that someone must have held him captive, warning him that he is way too trusting of strangers, though she claims the scent of blood on him is impossible to fake. So Wu Ming finally loses his cool and tells Haifei to quit sniffing people like a total creep. Haifei calls out Wu Ming for his uncharacteristic hostility, and she pushes the guilt trip by questioning if he is even the same brother who once loved her. Wu Ming folds immediately under the pressure, blaming himself for ruining the reunion and trying to brush off the drama as a minor misunderstanding, which leaves Haifei completely thrown by how fast he pivoted from cold to apologetic. He tries to smooth things over by introducing his new companion, claiming they only met yesterday, but the timeline clearly is not adding up for her. Haifei is still trying to figure out why Wu Ming is so protective of Tongde, suspecting the kid might just be a bounty target, but when she tries to get a read on him, she realizes his blood has no scent at all, like it has been scrubbed clean into nothing but pure, transparent water. And when Wu Ming confirms they were caught in the explosion last night, Haifei realizes she completely misjudged the kid as a total nobody. Wu Ming tries to play it off as fate bringing them together after sharing some hardships, leaving Haifei with absolutely nothing to say. Haifei pulls Wu Ming aside, needing to address the one thing he has been avoiding, and she demands to know why he was found sleeping in a coffin instead of hunting down Van Helsing, reminding him that he once nearly got himself killed insisting on a duel against that legendary Blood Clan hunter. But Wu Ming clutches his head in genuine confusion, admitting he has absolutely no memory of ever facing that guy, which makes Haifei even more suspicious since forgetting a threat like that is impossible, even after a century-long nap. Haifei starts laying out the history of Van Helsing, a guy who basically wiped out the Blood Clan a century ago, and since nobody could touch him, the clan hit their absolute lowest point while watching their families get slaughtered. So Wu Ming, being the strongest one left, decided to step up and challenge the monster himself, ignoring every warning to stay back, which forced the entire clan to dump their collective power into him through a reverse embrace just to give him a fighting chance. But after the dust settled, Van Helsing vanished, and Wu Ming went missing too, leaving the clan with no answers and a massive power void. This blood bond that once tied the clan together was suddenly severed by a mysterious curse, and while Haifei and Wu Ming struggle to grasp how such a thing is possible, Tangde cuts through the confusion with a cold, hard fact. He explains the bond is actually just demonic Tao, which can be neutralized if someone manages to balance it with an equal amount of spiritual energy. Haifei immediately snaps at the kid for acting like he knows anything about their clan's ancient secrets, but Wu Ming shuts down the bickering to explain that the power he borrowed never returned, leaving the clan to spend a century searching for a ghost. Wu Ming asks how the rest of the clan is holding up, and the answer is surprisingly optimistic, claiming they have managed to thrive despite the chaos of the last century. Haifei pivots to her own success, bragging about running American finance while pointing out two women standing right next to her. Wu Ming finally registers their presence, and the two women, Annie and Anki, immediately address him with the formal title of Young Master. Haifei clarifies that these two are actually bank CEOs who just wrapped up a business trip by her side, making their meeting here seem like a total coincidence. Wu Ming notes how much work she must be juggling, but she just shrugs it off like running the economy is barely a chore. Wu Ming questions the timing, wondering if their power really returned that recently, and he explains that the recent explosion triggered a mental shift, causing the ancient curse to finally loosen its grip on him. So he turns to Haifei to confirm if the others felt that same strange hallucination during the blast. But one of the bank CEOs interrupts, casually dropping the bombshell that she was the one who actually shattered the curse, which makes Wu Ming realize his century of memory loss wasn't just a simple lapse, but a direct result of that seal finally cracking. Beyond just releasing the sin, Wu Ming reveals that the process triggered a flood of long-lost memory fragments, and these flashes confirm that his time spent in the coffin was the exact moment his powers and memories were locked away, which means the seal on his Blood Clan abilities is directly tied to that ancient curse. So Tangde realizes that breaking the curse is the key to getting everything back, and he claims to have finally found a lead on how to do it. But as he starts quoting his master and tries to head out, the group panics and rushes to stop him from leaving. Haifei is suddenly obsessed with her newfound wealth, and she starts waving it around like it is the solution to everything. She figures she can just buy off Tong Di's services to keep him close, even though she still thinks he is a total nobody. This bank CEO questions why they are relying on a kid when the Blood Clan has all the resources they could ever need, but Haifei doubles down on her gut feeling that this lead is the real deal. This CEO confronts Tong Di about his master's financial status, and equally explains that his master treats every opportunity as a way to monetize his skills. That professional spin does not impress the CEO, but she is ready to pay double just to get him on board, and Tongde does not hesitate to take the $200 payout. Tongde notes down the Heaven Dynasty account details to verify the funds, and Haifei tells her brother to keep an eye on him while she handles the transfer. But the bank CEO is already doubting the move, convinced that anyone associated with such an annoying master is trouble. So Haifei pivots and orders the CEOs to freeze Tangde's account instead of paying him. And she leaves a final, cold ultimatum for the account holder to deliver regarding the money. Haifei is still pushing for her brother's happiness, but Tangde's phone starts blowing up with an incoming call, and he answers to find his master on the other end, stumbling over his words while trying to explain the situation to someone else. So Haifei jumps in to demand the secret to breaking that spell, only to hear the master admit he's completely tapped out of magic power, which leaves them at a dead end until the master mentions his junior brother might actually have the juice to pull it off. And Tongde is left reeling at the reveal that his master has other disciples from the mysterious True Xuanmen sect. This master confirms his junior brother is currently working a spiritual commission in America, so Tongde immediately demands the location to track him down. A digital map pops up with the exact coordinates, and the master forwards the data to Tongde's phone. This master hangs up to handle his own travel arrangements, but he drops a surprise order for his disciple to accompany Tongde on the trip. Tongde is clearly thrown by the sudden change in plans, but the master insists that he needs to stick by his friend until the curse is finally broken. He turns to Haifei to confirm they finally have a solid lead, though he is still forced to remain in this location for the time being. Tangde and Haifei pinpoint the target's location to Blue Ash Town, realizing it is just a short flight away. That travel time is barely an hour, so they head straight for the American suburb to track down the specialist. Arrival at the destination reveals a quiet neighborhood, but the local atmosphere is anything but normal. An exorcist named Alice shows up on the scene, immediately picking up on a heavy, lingering sense of resentment in the air. She starts digging into the local supernatural rumors, clearly ready to handle whatever is actually haunting this town. Alice verifies the local rumors about the Blue Ash Town monster are legit, and she immediately shifts gears to start exorcising the spirits haunting the area. But a stranger interrupts them by bowing and addressing the guy behind her as Senior Wan Fu. Then he begs this supposed senior to help him break a curse, only for Alice to realize he has the wrong guy, though she is clearly caught off guard by his appearance. This stranger finally realizes he's got the wrong person, asking if he really messed up the identity of Senior Wan Fu. Alice and her companion aren't having it, calling him out for thinking a guy like that could be some random Chinese uncle. Things get weird fast when the pink-haired girl accuses Alice of being a total pervert for supposedly flirting with her brother. He tries to walk back the awkwardness by blaming his bad eyesight and claiming he only approached them because he heard they were exorcists. Alice pivots to the mission by asking if he's hunting a specific spirit, and he admits he's new here but thinks he might have a lead on their target. This pink-haired girl drops the grim reality that their target is likely already dead, and pulls up a social media feed to show how the supernatural community ranks these cases, where the Blue Ash Town incident is trending because every single investigator who tried to solve it has vanished without a trace, so she questions why this group would be reckless enough to show up here, before noting that Alice is clearly not like the other run-of-the-mill exorcists they usually encounter. This pink-haired girl starts bragging about her status as a top 3 star in the Strange Tales circle, and she flaunts a checklist of solved supernatural cases to prove she is gunning for the #1 spot. Dismissing their mission as a waste of time, this self-proclaimed expert claims their target is already dead, which leaves the guys visibly annoyed by her attitude. This blonde exorcist refuses to back down, insisting that finding his person is too important to give up now. Calling them stubborn fools for ignoring her warning, the girl turns her back and walks away. This pink-haired girl doesn't seem bothered by the danger as she continues on her way, and she summons her spirit companion Hakimi to start tracking the target for her, dismissing the local threats as nothing more than minor pests that aren't worth her time. But the guy with the sword realizes the situation is far more dangerous than she thinks, confirming through his phone and calculations that the area is actually a distorted 4 symbols feng shui site. This sword wielder notes a 90-degree shift in the local feng shui alignment, which isn't a red flag on its own, but he uncovers a second, outer layer of distortion that's perfectly inverted from the first, creating a volatile clash of spiritual forces that he identifies as an extremely ominous sign of impending trouble, and he realizes this setup is a breeding ground for a powerful, vengeful spirit, leading him to suspect Wan Fu might be involved. So the blonde exorcist connects the dots and realizes Wan Fu's fellow disciple is likely already inside, fighting for his life. This blonde guy pushes his tracking method as the best way to locate the missing martial uncle, but the kid remains skeptical of his plan. She snaps back that her master forbade her from interfering until her brother solves the case, which the kid calls out as a lazy attempt to collect a reward, so she finally caves and agrees to lead them. They start moving toward the site, but the atmosphere shifts as they head deeper into the area. A local child spots something floating above them and points it out to her mother, completely oblivious to the fact that the cute balloon is actually the pink-haired girl's spirit companion, Hakimi, stalking them from the shadows. This local kid tries to snag the spirit balloon, but the pink-haired girl snaps at her to back off before anyone notices something supernatural, realizing it is a massive liability that civilians can spot her companion, especially since the local evil energy is spiking, so she lets Hakimi guide the blonde exorcist and his crew through the streets while she keeps her distance, and the spirit directs them through the intersection to keep them on the right track, leading them deeper into the heart of the district until they reach the end of the road. This pink-haired girl turns on the group, demanding to know if they are trying to compete by following her, but the blonde exorcist shuts her down, telling her they found the path on their own, and she shouldn't think she's the only one capable, which sends her into a rage because they tracked the location without using any spiritual energy. A feat she insists is impossible, and while the kid explains that burning energy would only tip off the enemy, she just calls their entire feng shui practice a total scam. So she digs her heels in and refuses to move, daring them to show some real skill if they want to keep up. This blonde exorcist calls for a right turn, keeping the group moving toward their target. But the pink-haired girl isn't having any of it, mocking them for being completely lost and calling them amateurs before ditching the group entirely. And when they reach the supposed destination to find it empty and devoid of any spiritual activity, the kid starts questioning the reliability of the tracking, realizing the pink-haired girl's earlier display of power likely alerted the vengeful spirit to their presence, meaning they have been compromised from the start. With the trail gone cold at the empty destination, the blonde exorcist demands to know if the kid has a backup plan. They pivot to a local passerby, asking if he has seen a middle-aged man wandering around in strange clothes, and the blonde exorcist immediately recognizes the description being tossed around, so the blonde woman cuts in to confirm if they are talking about a guy named Wan Fu, which the local man confirms, forcing the group to realize that if he is missing too, they might be in way over their heads. This local mayor steps in to explain the town's recent string of bizarre occurrences, detailing how mysterious shadows and midnight music preceded a wave of unexplained livestock deaths, prompting him to hire specialists who ultimately failed to resolve the situation. And when he reveals that those experts vanished without a trace, the group confirms they are already aware of the disappearances. So the mayor brings up his encounter with Wan Fu, noting that the man was carrying a strange item when he was last seen, which leads the group to point out the heavy presence of evil energy in the area and demand to know if anyone has died here, leaving the mayor struggling to find an answer. This mayor finally spills that a fatal car accident happened on this very road a few months ago, and this guy Wan Fu immediately pivots to a $1,000 exorcism, telling the group to clear out for 2 hours. But when the clock runs out, the team realizes his so-called ritual method is looking suspiciously familiar, so the blonde exorcist cuts through the nonsense to demand the real story behind the accident victim. And the mayor confirms it was the John family tragedy, where an alcoholic father walked out and left the rest of them to rot. This John family tragedy started with a fatal car crash during a storm, leaving only a mother and her young son behind to deal with the aftermath. With the backstory confirmed, the blonde exorcist needs to track down the survivors, so she asks for their current location. They head out to a secluded house sitting at the base of the mountain to see if the family is still there. Someone knocks on the door and it creaks open, revealing a suspicious eye peering out from the darkness inside. This team doesn't waste any time and immediately starts grilling the resident for answers about the case. This kid tries to alert his mother about the visitors, but she shuts him down immediately, refusing to engage with anyone at the door. She forces George to handle the situation instead, pushing him out to deal with the intruders on his own. This exorcist tries to break the ice by offering the kid some gum, and he takes it without a second thought. George calls her nice, but she brushes it off with a sarcastic remark about being allergic to kids, though she admits the family's tragic story actually got to her. She drops the small talk to get straight to the point, asking him exactly what his brother was like before he died. George describes his brother as a kind, talented musician who could win over the whole town, and he remembers growing up watching his brother chase the dream of becoming a world-famous singer, until the brother finally landed a spot in the talent show finals with a contract that promised to change their lives. But then a sudden tragedy cut that future short, leaving the exorcist to process the weight of his story, so she pivots to the father, asking if he even knows about the death that tore their family apart. George spits out that his father is dead to them, wishing the man would just rot away somewhere far from their lives, and he explains to the exorcist that their childhood was nothing but a cycle of constant abuse at the hands of their drunk father, while adding that the man eventually spiraled into drug addiction, draining every cent of their savings and even stealing their household allowance to feed his habit. Then he recounts the day his mother bought his brother a guitar, which triggered such a violent rage that she was left permanently disabled from the beating. So it's no surprise that George is consumed by a burning desire to hunt the man down and kill him with his own hands. This team tries to bond with George over his deadbeat dad, but the pink-haired girl isn't having any of it. She snaps back that she never asked for their support, leaving the blonde guy confused about why they aren't working together. Calling them nothing but nosy intruders, she ignores the team's attempt to de-escalate the situation. She cuts the argument short to get back to the investigation, asking George if he truly misses his brother. George confirms he does, so she pivots to the real reason they are here and asks if he has noticed anything strange lately. George plays dumb and insists he hasn't noticed anything out of the ordinary, so the pink-haired girl shuts the conversation down, telling the rest of the team to quit tailing them. But they ignore her to compare notes, and Wu Ming confirms the area's energy levels are completely normal, which contradicts his earlier theory about a broken energy pathway, and he finally deduces that the evil spirit must be hiding out near the lake instead. George realizes the team is closing in on the truth, so he bolts without a word, leaving them standing there in the dust. They try to pin him down for answers, but he just screams that he knows nothing while sprinting toward the house. This erratic behavior confirms their theory, especially since his brother died right by the lake. This pink-haired girl decides they are done playing games and sets their sights on the brother's burial site. This team combs the area for any trace of demonic activity, but they come up completely empty-handed. Wu Ming runs the numbers on the graveyard's energy signature, confirming that the ambient aura is perfectly natural. Their constant presence is clearly starting to grate on the pink-haired girl's nerves, and she finally snaps, accusing them of being more persistent and annoying than the actual spirits they are hunting. This team drops the act and admits they are tailing her on purpose, so she tells them to either get moving or get lost. This pink-haired girl snaps at the team for nearly blowing her cover, wondering aloud if George is actually going to take the bait. She brings up the brothers' fatal car accident, but the team already knows the history, so she pushes past their boredom to get to the point. This bond between the brothers was supposedly unbreakable, yet George's lack of grief and his hollow words about missing him just don't add up. George's insistence that nothing is wrong in town despite the evidence makes her realize he is hiding something massive. She concludes that the evil spirit isn't just some random entity, but George's dead brother, and they have been meeting in secret all along. This blonde guy calls them out on their lure the snake out strategy, and the pink-haired girl confirms that Hakimi is tracking the spirit, but it got spooked and went into hiding, so she blames Wu Ming for scaring it off in the first place, leaving them with no other choice but to sit and wait for the target to resurface, and the long night of waiting clearly has the pink-haired girl running on fumes. This bickering continues as the team waits in the dark, with the pink-haired girl snapping that they're only there because she didn't want them messing up the operation. A sudden movement in the graveyard cuts the argument short, and she signals for total silence because their target is finally making an appearance. George walks right up to the burial site, calling out for his brother as if he's expecting a response from the grave. A spectral figure manifests with a guitar in hand, confirming their theory by greeting George like a long-lost partner in crime. This reunion hits a weird note when he mentions they've finally reached the last day, whatever that is supposed to mean. This spectral brother tries to manipulate George into giving in. A strange pink entity suddenly manifests to back up the spirit's demands, and George gets sent flying before he can even process the betrayal, forcing the spirit to grab him to complete the final step of their plan. Yet the kid digs his heels in, swearing he won't let this entity bring doom to the world. Alice and her spirit partner Hakimi jump into the fray, convinced they have finally cornered the enemy. George screams that they are completely misreading the situation, but his warning falls on deaf ears. Hakimi ignores the plea and charges forward, intent on finishing the job right then and there. This spectral brother steps in to block the strike with his guitar, forcing a clash between the two entities. This impact sends a shockwave that knocks George backward, effectively punting him out of the way of their fight. George screams for his brother, desperate to stop the chaos, but that pink entity doesn't care about his pleas and lunges, binding the spectral brother in a tight, suffocating grip, and George gets tossed aside like trash, slamming into the ground, which is a massive mistake because the spirit is now out for blood and ready to tear everything apart. This pink entity shreds through the dark tendrils, proving it has way more bite than its cute exterior suggests, and it barely spares a glance for the mess it made before turning its sights directly on Alice, who now finds herself the primary target as the shadows coil into a lethal serpentine shape. But the moment she realizes this is a seduction-type attack, it is already too late to dodge, and the shadows slam into her with full force, showing exactly what happens when you let your guard down against a spirit like that. Alice senses a massive surge of magical power and realizes she is dealing with a vampire, but George snaps her back to reality before she can lose her focus. She isn't backing down and immediately orders Hakimi to launch another assault, but the spectral brother stands his ground, using his guitar to intercept the incoming strike. This pink entity's power proves too much for his defense, tearing through his guard with ease, and since the jig is up, George reveals his fangs and decides it is time to stop holding back and finish this fight himself. This pink entity shreds through the dark tendrils, proving its power is far beyond what anyone expected, and George realizes he is completely outmatched as the energy starts to overwhelm his defenses. Then a massive surge of power erupts from his body, pinning him to the ground in a suffocating hold, which leaves him struggling to even breathe under the weight of the attack. So Alice spots the opening and decides it is finally time to finish the job and exorcise her target. Alice triggers the final purification, and the energy begins to tear the spectral brother apart, but the sheer force of the blast reveals a truth that changes the entire nature of the fight, as George realizes his brother wasn't the enemy, but was actually shielding the town from something far worse. And the weight of that fatal misunderstanding hits him, leaving him to break down as the realization sinks in, because a massive malevolent entity now manifests over the graveyard, proving the real threat was never the brother they just destroyed. This brother's sudden presence shifts the air, signaling that the real threat has finally arrived, and Alice immediately picks up on a massive, unprecedented spiritual wave that dwarfs anything she has felt before, while George pinpoints the exact source of that energy, which turns out to be the lake itself, and it is already surging toward their position. Then the entity strikes, snatching the orange-haired kid before anyone can even react to the incoming tide. George finally connects the dots, realizing his deceased brother wasn't a threat but the guardian who had been shielding him from spirits all this time, and the spectral brother's true form confirms he was the only thing keeping the town safe from whatever was lurking in the dark. But the ground shakes as the lake water erupts, signaling that the real nightmare has finally broken free from its watery prison, and the sheer scale of the creature emerging from the depths makes it clear that this power is on a completely different level. So the entity fully manifests, declaring its victory as it prepares to claim whatever prize it has been hunting this whole time. Alice finally identifies Hakimi as the mastermind behind this entire mess, and she launches a desperate strike, but the entity just swallows her attack like it is nothing, which leaves the creature completely unfazed as it watches her struggle, because her output is not even scratching the surface of its defenses, and Hakimi confirms that her very existence is the only thing standing in its way. This creature realizes it can't reach the full power it craves, so it turns its focus to George, mocking his pathetic attempt to finish it off for good. A twisted plan to hijack George's body the moment it returns to the living world is revealed, while the monster cackles and calls out his name. And finally, those claws sink into George to claim him as its new vessel. This spectral brother screams for George to get out of there, and he throws his own body into the path of the monster's claw to buy George some time, which forces the creature to realize that the threat it sensed earlier was actually him. But the monster's raw power is too much, and it slams him into the ground. Then it mocks him for thinking he could actually stop its plans. This spectral brother isn't holding back, unleashing a lethal strike that cuts through the monster's defenses, and the creature realizes it is completely outmatched, desperately begging for a moment to breathe, but its pathetic pleas fall on deaf ears as the brother keeps the pressure locked in. Then he drops the hammer with a cold command to vanish, and drives his fist straight through the monster's core to end the threat for good. This exorcism chant has completely failed, leaving the situation spiraling out of control, and the monster strikes back, admitting that the sudden resistance actually rattled it. But the spectral brother swoops in to catch George before he hits the ground, and despite his own injuries, he orders George to cast a time illusion to buy them a breather, which the entity ignores as it prepares to finish the job once and for all. This girl screams for them to run while they still have the chance, but George refuses to abandon his brother. She warns that his brother is a dead evil spirit bound to this place and her protection is fading fast. But George isn't listening, swearing he won't lose his brother a second time, and as she points out that both spirits are locked in a stalemate, the brother finally stirs and wakes up. Then he explains that a fighting spirit is born from a death fueled by pure hatred, destined to hunt down their killer. This evil spirit bind locks two spirits in a stalemate where they cannot harm each other, but breaking that cycle requires possessing a human body with a deep personal connection, and the spirit immediately locks onto George as the perfect vessel for its return, revealing that this monster is actually his missing father, who was murdered by George's own brother, fueling the hatred behind this entire hunt. This father is already laying into the mother, and he screams for her to hand over the cash, but young George steps in to stop the abuse, claiming his brother will be back any minute, which sends the father into a blind rage at the mention of his other son, and he delivers a brutal blow to the kid for daring to talk back. George hits the floor hard after that brutal hit, while his mother screams in terror watching him struggle to get back up. But he refuses to back down, shouting that he'll fight to the death despite the father mocking his physical state and threatening to end him right there. So the monster turns his rage onto the mother, grabbing her by the throat with a wire to finish what he started, leaving George helpless on the floor as he's forced to watch his own father strangle her to death. George lunges at his father in a desperate attempt to break the hold, but the monster just kicks him aside, keeping his grip tight on the wire around his mother's neck, and he doesn't even bother looking at his son, fully focused on finishing the job, while the mother's strength fades as the wire cuts off her air, leaving George to realize that his own father is truly beyond saving. This storm masks his movements as he reaches the bridge, and he pulls the car over to finish the disposal, dragging the bundled remains of George's mother out into the downpour, then hauling her to the edge of the railing, before dumping her into the river to erase the evidence of his crime. George breaks down in the rain, finally letting the weight of his mother's murder sink in. But he isn't alone for long as the truth about his brother's death starts to come out, revealing that his brother's sacrifice actually triggered his father's transformation into an evil spirit, which forces George to realize that the strange occurrences in town were never just random coincidences. And he finally comes face to face with that vengeful spirit in the woods, confirming his father is truly gone. This spirit claims he is the one who gave George his life, but George just screams for him to give it back right now, and recognizing the monster as his own father, George realizes there is no room left for mercy. So he unleashes a massive surge of power that forces the spirit to finally take him seriously, which catches the entity completely off guard as he realizes the kid is actually a threat. And George stands his ground in the woods, ready to settle the score with the bastard once and for all. George realizes his brother's lingering presence is actually weakening the cursed spirit, knowing that even in death, his brother never stopped protecting the town, and the group turns on Wuming for keeping this secret, realizing she has been playing them from the start. But Wuming admits she withheld the truth just to lure the monster into a trap, forcing the spirit to reveal his true form, which makes George realize the spirit only showed his hand because he thought he was the strongest one on the field. And as the spirit takes a devastating blow, it is clear that pushing past his limits was the only way to bring this monster down. This spirit claims he only needs a little more juice to become invincible, and he dumps his remaining energy into a massive blast meant to end George for good. But George isn't playing by those rules, vaulting over the attack to close the gap, landing a clean strike that slices right through the monster's guard, before shutting down the spirit's ego with a cold reminder that his arrogance ends here. George slaps a talisman directly onto the spirit's forehead, and initiates the soul conversion spell to strip away the monster's remaining power, which erupts into a massive wave of energy that completely engulfs the entity, tearing through the spirit's corrupted form until there is nothing left to hold it together, leaving George standing alone as the final remnant of his father's curse finally dissolves into nothing. This onlookers can't believe the sheer scale of the energy George just unleashed, and the blonde observer realizes his power is way beyond what anyone his age should possess, even suggesting he could go toe-to-toe with the tribe's great elders. Meanwhile, the older man nearby struggles to catch his breath after the fallout. Deciding he has seen enough, he turns his back on the scene to walk away. This group recognizes the stranger's gear as Wanfu clan attire, and they immediately start questioning his sudden appearance. He confirms his affiliation and drops the name of the protagonist, Big Brother, claiming he was sent on a rescue mission. This guy insists he has been tracking the spirit that swallowed the protagonist, even crediting the nephew for the save. But the kid isn't buying any of it. He tries to play it off like he was just infiltrating the spirit to finish it himself, but he cuts himself short when he spots something in the distance. A new figure emerges from the shadows, and the stranger drops the act to sprint toward him, shouting for his brother. This Wanfu clan member spots a new entity and immediately assumes it is another hostile ghost, but the blonde observer cuts him off, insisting that he is completely misreading the situation, because this newcomer is actually a guardian spirit tasked with protecting the village, and as the spirit reaches out to make contact with the protagonist, the Wanfu member is left totally blindsided. Then the protagonist recognizes his own brother, who explains that not every spirit out there is looking for a fight. This man starts breaking down the afterlife, claiming peaceful deaths create good spirits while hatred breeds evil ones, and he doubles down on the idea that their nature dictates whether they help or harm the living. But the brother isn't buying the binary, pointing out that if their father was truly good, he should have become a guardian, not a parasite, because the father's real plan is to hijack the protagonist's body and use it as a vessel for his own rebirth, which makes the protagonist snap, calling out the blatant lie since he already used the soul conversion spell to wipe the father out of existence. This protagonist attempts to harvest the scattered ghost energy, but the yield is nowhere near what his father possessed. So the brother reveals that the ghost of slaughter actually siphoned off the vast majority of that power, which was supposedly the fuel for a rebirth transition meant to protect the town and his own little brother. But the protagonist sees right through the act, calling out those noble excuses as nothing more than a calculated facade, and the younger brother is left completely shaken, finally asking if their father was really playing them the whole time. This spirit starts laying out his life story, complaining about how hard he worked to overcome his father's failures, and he spirals into a full-blown tantrum, claiming his quest for rebirth was harmless while demanding to know why they are interfering. But the protagonist isn't buying this victim act for a second, especially when the guy insists his actions don't concern anyone else. So he stares back with cold, dead eyes, completely unmoved by the spirit's desperate, screeching justification, while the brother and the blonde observer watch the standoff, ready to step in as the spirit's energy starts to unravel. This spirit lunges with a petty excuse, claiming he just wanted to cause trouble, while unleashing a wave of dark energy that forces the protagonist to go on the defensive. But the protagonist catches the strike with his bare hand, shutting down the assault before it can land. Then he channels his own power to finish this, ignoring the spirit's pathetic posturing, until the younger brother screams for him to stop, desperate to see his brother achieve his dream at any cost. This blonde observer begs him to spare the spirit, but the protagonist isn't backing down, because he knows that continuing down this road demands the younger brother's own life as payment. And the kid finally admits he has been memorizing those songs after every encounter just to carry on the dream, which reveals the spirit was the original source all along, leaving the truth hanging in the air. So the younger brother doubles down, declaring he is perfectly fine with dying if it means his brother finally gets what he wants. This younger brother approaches George with his guitar, finally ready to bridge the gap between them, and he asks the spirit to play his final composition so he can learn the melody, hoping to share one last song together before the end, which George accepts, finally dropping his guard to join the kid for a final performance. And the two begin to play, their music ringing out as the boundary between them starts to blur. This melody starts to bridge the gap between them, and the lyrics about chasing light in the darkness begin to resonate as they keep playing, the song pushing past hesitation while they find a rhythm together in the middle of the field. George's voice carries a weight that hits the brother hard, and he realizes just how much power is behind the melody. This brother recognizes that George's talent is on another level entirely, which leads him to admit it far surpasses his own. So George makes one final request, demanding the kid promise to carry his song and share his glory with the world before he fades. George fades away into light, leaving the younger brother with one final charge to share his music with the world. And as the spirit dissolves completely, the kid is left standing alone in the middle of the field, while the onlookers realize the spirit didn't just pass on, but actually transformed into something benevolent at the last second, which explains how the music itself became the vessel for his lingering presence. So even though the brother feels abandoned, he learns that George is still right there within the melody. This younger brother realizes George hasn't truly left, feeling his presence lingering within the guitar's melody, because kind spirits don't need to sacrifice lives to be reborn, instead anchoring themselves to things their loved ones cherish, just like that earlier ghost who manifested as candy for the girl, proving the brother has successfully become the voice of the instrument. So the kid asks if this means his brother is going to stay by his side forever. And while the answer is technically yes, the protagonist warns that an evil ghost turning benevolent is a miracle that doesn't happen every day. Haifei brings up the intel he gathered on Wanfu Ask, and he admits that seeing George's relentless drive made him realize they are cut from the same cloth. So he acknowledges that his own stubbornness might be doing more harm than good, forcing him to commit to a change in character. But as they pivot to the clan's future and his lost memories, an elder interrupts to dismiss their internal struggle as just another trivial youth problem. And this elder points out that while spiritual ascension supposedly requires shedding all desire and stubbornness, the path is rarely that simple. This elder argues that his sect rejects rigid rules in favor of following one's own heart and desires. Insisting there are many valid paths to the Tao, he explains that stubbornness itself isn't a flaw, noting how it transformed the ghost into a monster while simultaneously providing the anchor for his eventual redemption. It all comes down to the heart guiding that drive, which triggers a memory of young Wu Ming dreaming about finding his long-lost parents. When a friend asks about his own future plans, Wu Ming admits he has never really given it any thought, so his friend pushes back, demanding to know if he truly doesn't care about the reasons behind his abandonment or finding the people who left him behind. Wu Ming questions the point of chasing the truth if those who sought it before didn't want it, and his companion calls him out for his cold indifference, wondering if he has any regard for his own survival at all. So Wu Ming shifts the focus to the talisman sealing his lost memories, asking asking if his master uncle has the power to break them. But the monk insists that memories are essential to existence, pressing him again on why he seems so ready to throw his life away. And finally, the monk questions if Wu Ming is even the same person he used to know, leaving the air heavy with doubt. Wu Ming asks his master uncle to finally clear the air, but the old man insists that even family needs to settle their debts first. He demands the consultation fee right then and there, tossing in a 12% discount just because they are technically his students. This client is clearly thrilled that the job went off without a hitch, so he is more than happy to pay up for the service. As the client hands over the mission fee, the master uncle realizes he is about to pocket cash for a job he did not actually lift a finger to finish. He awkwardly accepts the payment while the disciples watch, realizing their teacher has no shame about taking credit for their hard work. Master uncle pivots from the payment to the unfinished business at the lake, insisting his disciple needs to step up and help his friend. Then he drops the bombshell that the ghost wasn't a natural occurrence but a deliberate creation, pointing to a demonic ritual site right where George's father was buried. So George and his partner dive down to confirm the intel. Finding the corpse bound in chains within a glowing demonic circle at the lake bed, they surface to alert the mayor about the gruesome find, and the group immediately demands visual evidence of the crime scene. This digital camera reveals the damning proof of the ritual, leading the girl to finally snap at the master uncle for his constant, infuriating lack of professionalism. Master uncle brushes off the discovery as a total coincidence, but Wu Ming points out the matching demonic sigil found on both the ghost and George's father, which leads George to the chilling realization that the same person behind the ghost might have been the one to seal him away, and Wu Ming confirms that the creator is indeed the same, though Master Uncle quickly corrects him, noting that the entity who sealed Wu Ming is a completely different player. Master Uncle finally stops the chatter and rings his bell to initiate the ritual break, sending powerful sound waves rippling across the lake to reach the hidden site below. And as the resonance hits the underwater seal, the demonic circle begins to lose its grip, causing the heavy chains binding the corpse to start tearing apart under the intense pressure. So the seal finally crumbles, proving the old man actually knows what he is doing. Master Uncle hands the mayor a protective symbol for the lake, instructing him to pull it after 9 days to ensure the threat stays contained. Then he pivots to test Wu Ming on the 9 ghost circle, prompting the kid to confirm he knows how to dismantle the ritual, but the old man drops a heavy truth that the technique was created by the very enemy who wiped out their sect, which leaves Wu Ming stunned because his master never spoke of that tragedy. So Master Uncle explains it was a lifelong burden for him, revealing they belong to the Xiaoyao sect, a group that follows the heavenly path but rejects the typical asceticism and isolation of their peers. Master Uncle explains that the Xiaoyao sect thrives by following nature, using techniques so potent they border on the extreme, but he admits these methods are restricted to the chosen few, keeping their order hidden from the rest of the world. And while outsiders often mistake their unconventional lifestyle for demonic practice, he insists they are actually blessed by the heavens to reach immortality, which hits home for Wu Ming as he recalls his master losing everything after failing the so-called immortality trial, though the Master Uncle just watches him, knowing full well that the trial was never the simple test his student believes it to be. Master Uncle finally drops the truth that Wu Ming's spiritual father didn't just fail a trial, but had his roots stripped by their enemy, and this guy was a total legend, commanding the elements and standing one step away from immortality before everything went sideways. But 20 years ago, the enemy finally showed up to settle the score, and despite the spiritual father's best efforts, he watched his comrades get wiped out while his own power proved completely useless against the intruder, so he unleashed a final reality-bending strike that erased his opponent from existence, though he vanished into the void right along with him. Master Uncle explains that while his brother survived that final strike, he lost his spiritual roots and the ability to cultivate, leaving him convinced that he alone caused the sect's downfall. So he warns Wu Ming to keep playing the part and never let on that he knows the truth, but Wu Ming pushes for answers on whether it was truly a trial or an outside attack, forcing the old man to admit he still has no idea who the enemy was or why they were targeted. Yet the investigation into those secrets has never stopped, and finding the 9 ghosts circle today finally gave him a concrete lead, because the ritual's unique signature matches the exact technique used by the enemy 20 years ago. Wu Ming presses for a description of the enemy from 20 years ago, wondering if the guy is still even alive. Master Uncle admits he has no idea what the intruder looked like, leaving the group hanging on the lack of intel. This enemy's spiritual pressure was so overwhelming that nobody could even make out a face, which explains why they have been chasing ghosts for 2 decades. Wu Ming realizes the description matches a figure known as Van Helsing, and the group immediately recognizes the name. Master Uncle is shocked they know the name, revealing that the vampire clan suffered a similar disaster 100 years back. This group connects the dots, realizing the name Van Helsing's links their sect's destruction to the disaster that hit the vampire clan a century ago, and with that, the blonde guy begs Master Uncle to break the heartlock seal on his memories. But the old man explains that only the original caster holds the key, which leaves the guy staring into a dead end, convinced that his lost memories are locked away forever, until Master Uncle pivots to a desperate alternative, asking for the identity of the very first person the guy saw when he finally regained consciousness, He confirms it was a strange young man, potentially the only lead they have left to break the seal. This blonde guy suddenly realizes the first person he saw after waking up wasn't some random cultist, but the very person he is standing next to right now. He confirms the memory, and the realization hits the group that this isn't just a coincidence, it is a massive break in the case. Master Uncle calls it Heaven's Will, realizing they finally have a way to shatter that memory seal once and for all. This plan is for the blonde guy to cast a sex spell to bridge the seal, letting Master Uncle force it open with a counter spell. Since the blonde guy needs to be a master of their arts to pull it off, the group prepares to start the ritual immediately, despite his snarky comments about their weird sect traditions. Master Uncle starts by pinning down exactly when the blonde guy regained his senses, and he gets a precise timestamp of midnight. With the timing locked in, the old man traces a ritual mark onto the guy's forehead to prepare for the memory bridge. Next comes the birth date, which the blonde guy provides as December 12, 1912, right at the stroke of midnight. Master Uncle quickly calculates the alignment of the dragon year and metal hour, then turns to ask Wu Ming for his own birth details. Wu Ming admits he has no clue when he was born, and the old man faceplants in total disbelief at the lack of preparation. Master Uncle is absolutely losing his mind because Wu Ming lacks basic birth info, and he's ready to kick the kid out of the sect for being so unprepared. Wu Ming drops the truth that he's an orphan with no records, which instantly kills the old man's fire and leaves the room in an awkward silence. Master Uncle sighs and decides this is just Heaven's will, accepting that they'll have to find another way to move forward with the ritual. He starts heading out but can't help himself, offering his professional services for a 30% discount if they run into more trouble. This blonde guy is clearly over the old man's greed, but that doesn't stop him from flicking a business card at Wu Ming before making his exit. Wu Ming studies the business card and immediately recognizes the design because it belongs to the blonde guy's master. But the moment he identifies it, a massive magical score erupts into the night sky, signaling a summons for the servants of the old god to gather. While the mysterious pianist broadcasts a message about a coming world order, and he finishes his performance, ensuring his call to arms echoes for everyone to hear. Word comes in that Miller is dead and the mission is a complete failure, which forces the pianist to cut his performance short and pull his hands from the keys. Then he orders Pandora to gather the leaders immediately to deal with the fallout, and she sprints into the hall with another associate to answer the urgent summons. But the interruption to her beauty sleep leaves her in a foul mood the moment she arrives. This hooded figure insists they aren't responsible, pointing the finger directly at the president for this disaster, and with the news that Miller is dead, the group finally confronts the reality of their failed mission. Pandora scoffs at the idea that Miller was ever up to the task, insisting that the target is far too abnormal to be tamed, while the others argue about the latest headlines regarding this new generation. Though one member admits he was too exhausted to even check the feed, but the talk turns to a major covered-up incident at the New York airport, confirming that Miller's death was just the start of the chaos. This pianist clarifies that Miller didn't just fail. He died because the curse he tried to use rebounded right back on him. Sending Miller was a calculated move by the old god to neutralize a threat, but the plan backfired in the worst way possible. Pandora isn't buying the excuses, pointing out that the massacre 2 nights ago was supposed to be their operation, not a random casualty. It turns out the old god and the Phenomena Society both targeted the same person simultaneously, and that level of timing is definitely not a coincidence. This hooded member drops the real bombshell, identifying the target as the Pillar of Fate that the old god has been hunting down all this time. This old god's grand trial centers on the Pillar of Fate, a being powerful enough to warp destiny even in higher dimensions. And since this target not only survived Miller's curse but reflected it back to strike the deity, the old god is now certain of his identity, which leads the group to question what the god actually intends to do with this anomaly. So the pianist is ordered to hand over the touch of the old god to Pandora, who is now tasked with deciphering the pillar's true nature, even if the pianist remains worried about the threat this target poses to their master. This pianist calls Chanel out for questioning the great god, noting her faith is clearly starting to crack, and he slams his hands onto the keys to unleash a literal symphony of lethal sound, which catches Chanel off guard as the notes materialize into a physical assault. So she tries to hold her ground against the crushing weight of the melody, but the music is tearing her apart from the inside, leaving her unable to even scream. This melody is literally tearing Chanel apart from the inside, and she can't even manage a scream as the sound waves hit. She collapses to the floor, gasping for air while the pianist continues his lethal performance without missing a beat. That sadistic bastard is clearly enjoying the show, deciding it is time to take things to the next level. He plucks a single strand of hair from her head to use for his divination, forcing her to endure the agony for the sake of the old god. With the hair now in hand, he orders her to proceed with the ritual, and she has no choice but to obey. This pianist channels the ritual using the hair he just snatched, and the divination manifests as a glowing orb that reveals the true nature of their target. This group watching in the theater realizes the sheer scale of the threat, with one of them noting that this pillar is a straight-up death sentence for their deity. This vision confirms the pillar will bring about the old god's total collapse in 3 years, leaving the pianist visibly trembling at the the weight of that prophecy. This group decides to abandon the Phenomena Society entirely, shifting their full focus toward hunting down the Pillar of Fate before it can threaten their deity. But the current state of the world restricts full power usage to only 2 people at once, which has this guy swearing up a storm about how annoying that limitation is. His companion with the pistol snaps back, telling him that using profanity as a personality trait is just plain pathetic, while the woman holding the revolver suggests a partnership with James, aiming to combine the eye and power of the old god for a lethal advantage. James weighs the offer, ultimately agreeing but throwing out a cold warning that she better not try to betray him when the dust settles. They decide that digging into his lineage is the only way to finally track down his brother, and since that makes him a necessary asset, she confirms he is officially indispensable to the mission, sealing their new partnership with a firm grip. But when they set their sights on China to uncover the truth, the kid tries to slow things down, which only drives James crazy as he realizes the truth is slipping through his fingers once again. Wu Ming is clearly hesitant about uncovering the truth, even though he knows it needs to come out. He is terrified of another attack, but when his companion suggests turning to Duke Vlad for protection, he flat out refuses because the guy gives him the creeps. She tries to argue that Vlad was a massive help to their clan after his brother vanished, but the kid isn't budging on his stance. Realizing she is not winning this argument, she relents and offers to book a private plane to keep him off the radar during their travel. Wu Ming asks if she is joining them, but she has some loose ends to tie up first and promises to catch up later. Wu Ming reaches the private airstrip to find his ride waiting on the tarmac, where Rotiga and Phil are already standing by to welcome him aboard. Stepping inside reveals a level of luxury that catches the kid off guard, and he can't help but agree with his master that money really does make life easier. While Rotiga pours a drink, looking like he's already forgotten about the mission stress. Wu Ming starts getting impatient as the plane sits dead on the tarmac, so Rotiga moves to the cockpit to see why the pilots aren't moving. But he finds the entire crew slumped over the controls, and Wu Ming confirms they're just unconscious from a heavy blow, which hits Rotiga hard when he realizes the attackers are from his own clan, leaving him to wonder how they were neutralized without a sound. Rotiga steps out to find the entire security detail wiped out across the tarmac, and the sheer scale of the ambush forces a desperate curse from his lips as he screams into the void for an answer. Wu Ming steps forward with a grim conclusion, pointing out that these assailants are the same ones who hunted him down previously, and before Rotiga can even process the threat, Wu Ming vanishes into the distance to hunt them down. Wu Ming tears across the tarmac, but Rotiga is already shouting his name to get his attention. The sheer force of the strike registers as something far beyond a basic ambush, and Wu Ming realizes he is dealing with a serious threat. Rotiga demands to know if he caught a glimpse of their assailant, but Wu Ming admits he came up empty-handed. He tracks the trajectory of the strike back to its origin point and points the direction out to his partner. Before Rotiga can even process the lead, Wu Ming launches himself toward the source to settle the score. Rotiga watches the impact and struggles to track where the strike even originated from, realizing the source of the attack shifted mid-air, which makes no sense to him. But Wu Ming dismisses the idea of a cursed technique, noting the sensation was purely physical, and he points out that a single person took down these guards with the same method, leaving Rotiga to question if they are dealing with an invisible enemy right under their noses. Wu Ming pulls out a talisman, recalling his master's advice for handling a crisis, and he immediately triggers a wind-gathering spell to surround them with a defensive vortex, planning to seal off every angle of attack to neutralize the invisible threat. But a sudden impact breaks through his concentration, and he realizes the enemy has bypassed the barrier entirely to get right inside their guard. Wu Ming confirms his wind barrier should expose any hidden intruder, yet the space remains completely empty. Rotiga questions how an attack could manifest from thin air, and the invisible assailant immediately confirms their intent to strike again. Wu Ming channels a wind-gathering spell through his talisman to tighten the perimeter, and he dares the unseen enemy to keep testing their defenses with more hits. This attacker mocks their confidence, calling them fools for thinking a simple spell will solve their problem. Rotiga screams at Wu Ming not to give up, but the kid is already at his absolute limit. This invisible assailant unleashes a relentless barrage of strikes, and Wu Ming takes the full brunt of the assault without a chance to counter. Rotiga stands by, completely helpless as the unseen force continues to batter Wu Ming into the ground, and when the dust settles, Rotiga rushes to check if he is still breathing, deciding that he has to take a desperate gamble to keep him alive. Realizing this is the only way to pull him back from the brink, Rotiga prepares to commit to a final, extreme measure. Wu Ming snaps at Rotiga to shut up, clearly still in the fight despite the brutal assault, and Rotiga, stunned that the kid is even conscious, asks if he's actually the one with vampire-like durability. While the kid admits the beating was rough, he's already realized that one of those strikes connected with his hidden talisman, so pulling the damaged paper out confirms that the invisible attacker inadvertently marked themselves. And with the connection now established, he can track their location anywhere on Earth, turning the tables on the hunter. Wu Ming activates his path-tracking art to force the invisible hunter out of hiding, but the attacker immediately breaks off the engagement and retreats into the distance, which leaves Rotiga completely bewildered that their opponent would just walk away like that. Yet the paper talisman is already locked onto the target and zipping through the air, and Wu Ming uses that trail to corner the enemy before they can even realize they are being hunted. Wu Ming refuses to let the invisible target slip away, closing the gap with everything he has. He calls out that escape is off the table, forcing the hunter to finally stop running. This attacker retaliates with a high-velocity projectile, projectile, but Wu Ming tracks the incoming threat with ease. He deflects the shot using his talisman, only for the enemy to immediately pivot into a brutal spinning sidekick. Wu Ming barely manages to dodge the strike, realizing this guy isn't just a runner but a lethal close-quarters fighter. This attacker lunges for a killing blow, but Wu Ming is ready for the aggression. He intercepts the strike mid-air, locking the guy's wrist in a firm grip. With the momentum shifted, Wu Ming slams his opponent into the ground to end the exchange. This attacker tries to follow up with another clawed swipe, but Wu Ming catches that one too. This guy demands to know why they are being hunted, only for Wu Ming to calmly clarify that this isn't a simple chase. This attacker claims he was sent by an ancient god to take out the yellow-haired boy, then pivots to hitting on him with some weird talk about being enchanted by his beauty, and after dropping a confusing explanation about his gender identity and preferences, he leaves the kid totally baffled. But the conversation ends abruptly when the attacker puts a hole through the boy's head, which brings Lias into the mix to demand why he shot the kid while admitting she is just jealous. Lias is venting about being ignored for some random guy, and the frustration is clearly boiling over as Lias, a member of the Wisdom of the Stars sect who identifies as male, starts unloading on the target, but the guy on the bench shuts that down immediately by stating he has zero interest in men and doesn't view Lias as a woman, which only triggers a heated argument about gender and appearance until the third party involved finally loses his patience with the constant bickering, and he ends the entire conversation by launching a brutal kick that sends Lias flying. This yellow-haired boy stands his ground, declaring that the kick was retribution for Wu Ming and anyone targeting his friends is now a direct enemy, warning the guy to stay away if he knows what is good for him. But the attacker just stays on the ground, muttering about a lifetime of rejection, and he starts rambling about how he has been used since he was a child, which finally pushes him over the edge, as he vows that anyone who rejects him will be forcibly reformed by his ancient god. This yellow-haired boy mocks the attacker's obsession with the old god, noting it has been a century since those puritanical days, and he calls out the guy for still acting like he is suffering from some pathetic deep-seated illness. So the attacker lunges forward with a desperate, heavy punch to silence the insults, but the boy manages to dodge the blow, creating a bit of breathing room for himself, and the attacker immediately commits to a follow-up strike that forces the kid to stay on the defensive. This attacker connects with a brutal strike to the face, and the impact leaves the yellow-haired boy reeling as blood sprays across the scene. But the assault doesn't stop there as the attacker fires a lethal blood projectile, which slams into the boy and sends him flying back with a massive spray of gore. Yet the attacker realizes his attack failed to pierce the target, who is now being yanked away by an unknown force. This attacker launches another heavy strike, and the force of the blow tears through the ground, forcing the yellow-haired boy to track the movement, which he realizes is deceptively fast. And as he recognizes the pattern, he realizes the attacker is repeating the same lethal technique. But before he can react, the strike lands and slams him into the ground with brutal force. This yellow-haired boy launches a desperate aerial strike, bringing his blade down on the bearded man, and the steel carves into the man's shoulder, finally forcing him to bleed. But the guy just catches the sword with his bare hand, deadening the impact instantly. Then he delivers a heavy counter that sends the kid flying backward, and the man closes the distance with a crushing blow that leaves the boy scrambling to survive. This black-haired fighter manages to regain his footing after being sent flying, but the yellow-haired ally steps in to intercept the bearded man before he can press the advantage, and their collision creates a massive shockwave that forces everyone to reset their positions. So the yellow-haired guy checks on his partner to make sure he is still standing, but the black-haired guy is more worried about his broken wooden sword and mounting medical bills than the fight itself. This black-haired fighter realizes the bearded man is wielding Po Dao, a technique that essentially nerfs any magic path power, and his stats are being boosted by some external law that makes his speed and force impossible to predict, which they trace back to a high-grade spiritual tool in his pocket that acts like a vacuum for path energy. So they weigh the possibility of magic immunity, but realize the tool has a limit to how much it can actually process. And since the previous blood attack managed to leave a mark, they know they just need to hit him hard enough to overwhelm the device. This black-haired fighter notes that the Ma Dao power was strong enough to deal real damage, while the yellow-haired ally explains his chant of the orb is still hampered by the seal, and knowing trouble is inevitable, the black-haired kid drops his bag to clear the way, discarding his outer robe to get ready for a brawl, because there is no running left, so they prepare to face him with their bare hands. This black-haired fighter dives straight into the fray, forcing the bearded man to react to his sudden aggression, and after ducking a massive swing, he drives a fist right into the man's chest. Then he keeps the pressure on with a flurry of strikes that actually connect, which leaves the bearded man genuinely rattled by how quickly this kid adapted to his power, so he demands to know how long he has been training, and the kid drops the casual answer of half a year, already calculating exactly how much longer it will take to put him down for good. This black-haired fighter notes the bearded man has abandoned his usual long-range tactics for a close-quarters brawl, and his yellow-haired ally realizes this shift is only possible because the man has stopped relying on magic. So the ally decides to jump into the fray to capitalize on the sudden opening, and together they unleash a coordinated assault that forces the bearded man to retreat under the pressure. But as the man finally panics and tries to activate his ability, Lace mocks him by demanding a confession of love before he will even consider playing along. This observer claims this is an official mission from the old god's lord, and he points out the bearded man's right hand as the critical target. So the black-haired fighter and his ally swarm him with a relentless coordinated assault, which forces the man to abandon his defense and throw a desperate, heavy punch. But he follows up with a massive, wide-reaching swing that sends both of them scrambling to avoid a direct hit. This black-haired fighter lunges in, closing the distance to keep the bearded man on the defensive, while Lace shouts instructions from the sidelines, telling him exactly how to angle his knee for maximum impact. So he shifts his weight and drives the strike home, just like he was told. And following the next command, he transitions seamlessly into a front kick that connects square in the man's chest, sending the target flying backward as the duo maintains their relentless, coordinated pressure. This duo is completely baffled by the opponent's bizarre fighting style because the force of his strikes is hitting them from impossible angles and distances, and the lack of travel time for the impact makes it clear this isn't just raw physical power. So they realize he is taking orders through an earpiece to coordinate these weird attacks, which leads them straight to the real mastermind pulling the strings from afar. This long-range shot lands, and the bearded man is caught completely off guard, which forces him to buckle under the sudden concentrated pressure. So the black-haired fighter and his ally seize the moment to unleash a relentless barrage of strikes. But he counters with a massive burst of force that sends both of them crashing into the dirt, and while the mastermind confirms the vampire is down, he realizes this guy is still standing and far too dangerous to ignore. This mastermind demands another barrage, refusing to accept that the fighter is still standing, but the black-haired fighter tracks the incoming fire and notices a recurring pattern, because every volley of bullets leaves a small, exploitable gap in the defensive line, so he shifts his position instantly to close the distance through that opening. And as the opponent commits to a new strike, the fighter prepares his own counter. A clean, brutal strike lands, sending the bearded man reeling, and while the target struggles to process how he got hit, he is already losing his composure. But our protagonist has finally cracked the code, realizing the ability is just distorted vision, which only irritates the bearded man further as he dismisses the technical talk as nonsense. So he lunges back into the fray, demanding a fight instead of a lecture. This kid realizes the bearded guy is just recycling the same bullet marks to launch his strikes. And thanks to the butterfly spell tracking the partner, he finally pinpoints exactly where the real threat is hiding, which reveals the trick. The partner marks a spot and perceives it as close range, forcing the attack to manifest right in the protagonist's face. So by mapping out the previous attack trajectories, he confirms that the entire ability is just a massive delusion of distance, and now that he knows the ability is tied to the partner's warped perspective, he can finally stop playing by their rules. He breaks down how the enemy forces their own subjective reality onto the physical world, and since he's already mapped the trick, he easily sidesteps the bearded man's desperate swing, then hits back with a counterforce that sends the guy sprawling across the ground. Because speed is the only variable that matters when you're fighting a delusion of distance, so he decides to flip the script and make this broken ability his own. This battered partner admits he is finally too broken to keep standing, and since their trick is officially exposed, Lai scrambles to come up with a new plan. So he tells his ally to keep fighting while he charges in for a desperate strike, but the protagonist effortlessly sidesteps the attack, making the bearded man look like a total amateur, and Lais realizes the kid can toggle the ability on and off at will to bait him into missing. This bearded man admits the kid is fast, but he is still brushing off the threat as a minor nuisance, and Lais keeps barking orders from the sidelines, demanding an all-out assault until the protagonist finally drops. But the kid is already calculating the limits of their shared ability, realizing he only needs to land a few more solid strikes to break them, so he shifts his focus entirely toward the partner, deciding that taking him out is the only way to end this loop. And Lais catches on to the retreat, sneering that no amount of speed can outrun his warped perspective. Lais realizes the kid isn't playing defense anymore, because he is charging straight at him with zero hesitation. This bearded man is losing his mind over the kid's speed, admitting that even his own accelerated power cannot keep up. Their coordination is falling apart as they bicker over whether to grab the kid or just open fire, so they finally launch a projectile. But the kid just dances through the air to avoid the blast entirely. Lais thinks he has finally baited the kid into the perfect kill zone, and he is screaming for the final blow. Xiao Wu barely clears the strike, his hand grazing the air as he pivots to avoid the lethal blow. He vaults into the air to dodge the follow-up, proving that his speed is still a step ahead of the trap. Lei shouts that there is no escape from this fate, but the kid is already repositioning to reset the fight. Xiaowu spots his phone lying nearby and picks up the call, coolly letting them know he is still in the game. This system finishes the random search for a chemical stimulant formula, and the data is finally ready for him to exploit. Xiao Wu realizes he needs exactly 5 charms to pull off his next move, and he burns through them all in one go, leaving himself completely broke but ready to strike. Laius watches the display and assumes the kid is just using a forced power charm that will eventually kill him, but the blast connects with devastating force, leaving his opponents scrambling as they realize the power is real. Xiao Wu revels in the surge of energy, and his opponent is sent reeling from the sheer intensity of the hit. Xiao Wu warns the weapon that its buff only lasts 10 seconds, and it's clearly not happy about the short notice, but the magic demon weapon flares into its true form anyway, ready to burn through that tiny window of power. And since it can shift into any shape, the weapon tells him to just name his poison. So he calls for a giant boomerang, and the weapon immediately morphs into the requested shape. Then Xiao Wu points out the trajectory, timing the throw so it circles back exactly when the 10 seconds are up. Xiao Wu hurls the weapon, and the massive red blade tears through the air with lethal intent. Laius tracks the incoming projectile and assumes it is a slow, predictable strike he can easily handle. But he miscalculates the trajectory as the boomerang curves in a way that defies his expectations, and his panicked ally screams a warning that the arc is locked onto his position, because Xiao Wu calculated the path to hit him regardless of how he tries to dodge. Laius is convinced the boomerang will miss him, but the trajectory is already curving back for a direct hit. This strike lands square on his partner instead, and Laius loses his cool the moment he realizes his teammate is taken out of the fight. This partner collapses completely incapacitated on the ground, leaving Xiao Wu standing over him with the upper hand. Laius sees his allies down for the count and decides to charge in himself to end the fight. He rushes forward with everything he has left, and Xiao Wu braces to deliver the final blow. Xiao Wu commits to the follow-up strike, driving his fist toward Laius with everything he has left. Laius sidesteps the initial lunge, clearly thinking he has already solved the kid's entire game plan, mocking the previous boomerang throw as a failed distraction. He is convinced he has read every move Xiao Wu is about to make. This guy is so sure he has timed the counterattack perfectly that he telegraphs his next swing, but Xiao Wu is already shifting his weight, letting the strike cut through nothing but empty air. Xiao Wu's trap finally snaps shut, and the weapon slams into Laius with enough force to shatter his guard, sending him spiraling backward as the tide of the battle turns, marking a decisive reversal that leaves him completely outmatched.